So obviously this is Mosaic design. We're going to cover Andamento and Opus. I'm going to start by giving a definition of terms. You may or may not have heard the term tesserae used. It is basically Latin for cube or die, which is the single of dice, not the plural is pronounced tessera, as far as I'm aware. In mosaic work, it's basically a piece of stone, glass, ceramic, or other hard material cut into cubical or other regular shape. So one way that I refer to that is by saying, this piece of glass that you can see in front of my face, but not when I move it away from my face, is a tile or a tessera. If I chop it up into 30 pieces, each one of those is a tessera. So tessera just is the stuff you glue down when you're making a mosaic. And the interstices are the space that's between two tessera. That's your grout joint mostly. And the width of the grout joint is going to affect the appearance of the overall design as well as the amount of grout needed. If you've got really wide grout joints, your grout is going to become a major design issue. I've done some projects where the grout line is actually the design. I keep it wider in some areas and then fill in the space between with thinner grout joints. And then Andamento is visual flow or direction your mosaic. Andamento then comes opus depending on how you use them. So you're creating certain patterns with your tessera in your Andamento, and with your tessera and grout joints actually to create your Andamento. I jump down to rhythm because that relates back to Andamento in that it kind of creates the Andamento creates the rhythm of a pattern. And the opus, you may have heard the term in music, it just is Latin for work. And in mosaics, it's a way of describing the Andamento, the flow of the tessera, or other features. And then there are probably more forms of opus that came up that I knew of, and others that came up in just a generic search. So opus regulatum is a grid. All of your lines horizontally and all of your lines vertically should be even. And it can be very calming if you've got a lot of stuff going on in the foreground. It can also be really boring if you overuse it. And where you break grid, for instance, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but right in here, this one blue tile breaks the grid a little bit because it's in the second row down, you'll find a tile that's a little wonky. The third row down, actually. And why, if they were all exact, that one would really stand out. But because they're all a little bit off, you don't notice it as much. So if you have to break grid, it really stands out. And if you would use this if you've got something that you want to have more of a Roman feel or an old-fashioned feel, something that's very staid in the background. And I have found in my own experience, if I feel like I'm going to do this for the background, I want to grid it off before I put my foreground in, because doing it with foreground elements and a ruler is really hard. Similar to regulatum is tessellatum, and that's it's like a brick wall. where your horizontal line is stable. It's a true line, but then your vertical is interspersed so that it does not have a real strong vertical feel. This is a little more interesting than Opus Regulatum, and I use it quite a bit. It's, you know, I found it to be something I really enjoy doing, because it just is, you establish your line and you just don't have to think much after that. And again, where the design breaks grid, it's really noticeable. And if you know, you can accidentally have really strong grout rivers going vertically. And so you want to look at, you know, look at your pieces and kind of offset them a little bit as much as you can. So in this design, I've used it to kind of create a landscape, kind of rolling hills. And this was a customer commission. The next one is Vermiculite. And if you look at the background, the foreground is all over the place. That's not what we're looking at. But if you look at the background, kind of like Tesserae, it creates strong line one direction and then not in the other. And this is, it gives it a feeling of the foreground design is kind of floating in its own universe, where you see the unswept floor mosaics, where you've got different elements on the floor. They're all surrounded by Vermiculite. And vermicelli worms. There's worms laid in, you know, on top of each other. If you've got breaks in the flow, it can be really noticeable. So you want to make sure that you are sticking to the foreground elements when you're doing the initial surrounding. And this is also, if you're using regulatum or tesserae in the background, if you surround your foreground element with a row of Opus Vermiculatum in the same color as your background, it will help to offset those weird cuts in your background that you have to make in order to stay in grid, and then make space for the foreground elements. It's a good tool to have, and you may not use it consistently, but it's just, you know, it works really well with other types of opus. Then we've got Palladium. And this is just kind of random scraps of stuff all laid randomly. If you've got areas where the grout joint's a little wide, it can call attention to itself. But overall, it gives it kind of a nice harmonious feel if you've got a really staid foreground, which I do in this piece. I'm going to mention Opus Sectile in a little bit. That's the green leaves and the purple center in this. It's a whole cut piece. That so you often see it looks more like stained glass effect, where they're cutting the pattern pieces out and then laying them with a grout joint. This is that it worked well together. And then this is the one I just had to make yesterday. This is Opus Circulatum. It's that fan shape. And let me move my head so you can see. Keystoning is, you will not be able to do this if you don't know how to keystone. And that's just making those random triangle pieces, cutting a corner off of one of the pieces. You'll see it throughout this. And it's just kind of a very rhythmic feel. So it's nice. It worked really well on its own, in addition to working with a foreground. And there are other opus styles. Opus sectile is what I mentioned with the piece with the red background. Opus peccatum, thank you, all that Latin. It's basically herringbone or something. It's a similar pattern, like you'd lay it with whole rectangular tiles for the most part. And then Opus Alexandria is no longer really in fashion in the West. It's kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? You inlay very decorative areas with very flat areas. It's kind of almost like laying them into cement. They used a glass paste just to do the surrounding. So it's similar to opus sectile. It was very popular at one point, and the styles changed and nobody does it much anymore. And the picassiette, that is kind of on its own, an opus all of its own. Are you familiar with picassiette at all, Erica?
No idea.
Okay.
I mean, I use dishes. I use ceramic dishes.
The picassiette form was first popularized by a gentleman in France who was a postman in a rural area. His name was Roland Isidore. He lived in a home with his wife and I think 2 sons. And as he was going on his route every day, he would pick up various pieces of pottery and stones that he found interesting. And eventually people would give him their old dishes or broken dishes. And the man went to town. He covered every surface on the outside of his house with broken dishes and patterns and, rocks, everything, all the kinds of found objects. He covered the outside of his home, covered the inside of his home, bedsteads, the stove, cupboards. I feel so sorry for his wife because, he can't cook while he's doing the kitchen. The walls inside the house, every surface he could possibly glue a tile to, he did. And still having more stuff, he made this whole grotto out in his garden. And it's got, a lovely rendering of the Chartres Cathedral and various points of French history. It's just incredible. And so he is the beginning of picassiette. I've heard it pronounced so many different ways. And it translates to plate thief. I love that. Plate stealer. So that's a more modern. I think that was back in the 20s, 30s. I'd have to look, but I mean, literally in the 20th century. He came up with the style, and it's just been picked up by a lot of mosaic artists. I myself do not care for it, but have done it. Because I had, and memory wear is kind of an offshoot of that, where you're using pieces that are precious to people, or to create something that will be important to them. So that's the bulk of what I've got. Do you have any questions?
No, that picassiette. That's picassiette. They have a lot of that in Philadelphia. A lot of the buildings are covered.
Isaiah Zager is huge in that. Kind of has his own style.
Yeah, it's all over the place though. I didn't know it. I didn't know any of this had names.
Oh, they all have names, because when you think about it, the Romans were great at categorizing things. And so a lot of these things, mosaics originate back in Sumeria, I believe, where they had clay cones that had glaze on the bottom, and they stuck them into a mud column and created all, mosaics with that, doing that. And then eventually the Greeks came into and took over that area, and they incorporated, all kinds of stone mosaics and working with semi-precious stones and just colored stuff. And then the Romans took it over from the Greeks, and they codified it in that glass.
So when you're planning a project,
Mm-hmm.
do you think of what style you want to? I guess that would make it helpful.
When I was first starting out, I didn't always think of the background, and these tend to be more background items. So I would come up with my foreground idea, lay that all out, and then think, okay, I've got to do background now. What do I want to do with that? And that's where I, had a ruler that I was laying over, I had a gridded ruler. I was just drawing lines behind the backgrounds, the foreground stuff. And I always thought it would have been so much easier if I had thought of this beforehand.
I'm getting that idea now.
And do you have to do any of these? No. You don't. I mean, you can make stuff up as you go if you want to, but odds are you're going to fall in either random, gridded brickwork or something similar. They're going to find a pattern for the most part.
And so what you're also saying is that if you veer away from the pattern that you've started, then the mistakes will be more obvious.
If you do it cleverly, you can see the mistakes, as you're laying the tile to pick them up, and and if you need to, before your glue dries, step away and look at it upside down and see what calls your eyes, see what catches your eye. If you're proofreading a headline, you always catch the mistakes if you're looking at it upside down.
Huh. Really?
Mm-hmm. And so look at it from a couple different angles, see what stands out to you. And if you're not sure and you're drawing your design out or sketching it out, lay in some outlines just to see how you want to do it. Because there are as many ways as there are people making stuff. And I've seen people do the same design 3 or 4 different times using 3 or 4 different work styles. I myself don't have the patience for that.
Well, this explains why there's a piece that I think there's something wrong with it. And now I think I know what it is, because I was doing, which one is it? Oh, Opus tessellatum. Yeah, and where everything was, it's actually more like waves. So, but it looks very similar. But so it's curved and goes down, but one of them is like rounded and it sticks out. It's wrong.
And I've seen mosaic artists take up half of their piece because they don't like the way that area looks. And so, that's certainly an option.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do, because it's been bothering me so much that I haven't gone back to it. I feel like it. But now I feel validated in I just feel like I have a better understanding of why that's wrong. So
yeah, well, and it's not that it's wrong per se, it just is not as effective as it could be.
Exactly. It's wrong.
Well, and wrong is such a subjective term, and I
looks
heard our
wrong.
teachers use it in ways that damage people. And I certainly don't want to be that person, but at the same time, there are
Sure.
ways to get the look that you want without distracting. It's not wrong. There are better ways to do it.
Right. That's the better way to say it. I can say that it looks wrong. I think it looks right.
As an
right,
instructor, that's not going to
Yes.
be my go-to.
I understand. Well, this was good. This is great.
Good. Oh, that's all I got.